Hi, my name's Camelia Shofani, and I'm the Senior Manager of Public Programs and Events at the International Documentary Association. We're joined here with the filmmakers of Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey, a Song, and moderated by Scarlett Robertson, who is our fall screening series curator. So with that brief note, if you have any questions about the screening series, any upcoming Q&As, you can go to documentary.org/screening series. And I'll let Scarlett take it away. Thank you, Scarlett.
Oh no, she's muted.
Is this edited? I hope so. Hi, thank you, Camelia. To start, I wanted to ask Dan and Dayna, what was your first encounter with Leonard Cohen in your life?
The first most meaningful encounter, I mean, obviously we'd heard his songs, especially Hallelujah and Suzanne and, So Long, Marianne. The first really kind of life-altering, like, we are fans of Leonard Cohen, happened in 2009 when he was on that first wave of his kind of worldwide victory tour that lasted for 5 years. Some really dear friends of ours who were fans told us that we had to go, and they bought us a pair of tickets. And they took us across the Bay Bridge to the Paramount Theater in Oakland. And you hear it in our film, people describe those concerts as church-like or spiritual encounters with these incredible musicians, and then Leonard, of course. And that's what it was like. It was instant converts to Leonard Cohenites.
There's something that he says in interviews and elsewhere that I just started to hear recently, and it's remarkable. A lot of people, when they go to a concert, the performer will say, "It's great that you've come to our show," right? Or "It's great to be in such and such a place." But Leonard would say, "Thank you, friends, for our gathering here tonight." And I thought, wow, that is a very different notion of what it means to be a performer, what it means to gift song, and what it means for the performer to have something gifted back by the audience. So that, I think that's partly why the mood in the room, and I think it seemingly was the case around the world, was so unusual for a concert.
I understand the film is inspired by a book. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, the initial concept came from this conversation. A lot of times documentaries come from random encounters or whatever, the initial little seed. So we were actually having dinner almost exactly 8 years ago with David Thompson, who's just an incredible writer about films. And he posed the question, which was, have you ever considered making a documentary about a song? And although we weren't initially struck as he asked the question, the song Hallelujah and the image of Leonard performing it at that concert at the Paramount just came flooding back in. So we kept thinking about it. I turned to Dan and I said, I thought of the song, I thought of the singer-songwriter, it's Leonard Cohen, it's Hallelujah. But then the next day, still sort of mulling that question over, we did a Google search and up came Alan Light's book. And that confirmed our very nascent hunch that maybe there was something in that song. And so we were like, wow, if someone who's a respected journalist could find 250 pages worth of interest. And so we bought the book, and then we were just blown away by, we knew the story of Leonard Cohen, which is amazing, and his spiritual search, but to see as well this unbelievably dramatic trajectory of this song out into the stratosphere, from a rejection to the stratosphere, was like, we can do this.
I know that you had his approval. What was your relationship like?
Well, Alan Light was really helpful about this, because he said the way he got permission to do the book was that he asked only for a tacit blessing. In essence, saying, not going to ask for an interview, go out, do this on his own. And that worked. And Leonard really liked Alan's book. In fact, at one of those listening parties, which was what Leonard did toward the end of his life with the latest, some of his last albums, he asked Alan to moderate one, and then turned to Alan during it and said, by the way, I really enjoyed your book. Alan has told us since that he pretty much froze in, in the moment. He was so overwhelmed by that lovely comment. But Alan's advice, and it was good advice, was ask for the same thing. Say you don't want an interview, say you don't want anything more than a tacit blessing, which, as documentary filmmakers know, would be essential in working with music, because the publishing rights to the song can be blocked. Even though Leonard had sold his catalog up to the year 2000, by the time we approached him, he had a yes or no clause in his contract. So he could block the use of the song in movies and TV and so forth. And that, with a short description, because we were told keep it short, was what we went to his manager with, Robert Corey, who then went to Leonard. And Leonard very quickly was intrigued by what we were proposing, the twinning of the arc of the song and the investigation of Leonard's spiritual life and seeking through the song.
And also wanting to bring in the voices of other singers, songwriters who had been moved to cover that song and have their own interpretation of it. So it was kind of like, from the beginning, was a 3-part braiding.
So we didn't ask for more than that. And that really was the extent of his direct participation in the movie, other than when we were filming an interview with Dominique Isserman, who's an incredibly gifted photographer and filmmaker herself, and was, as Leonard says in the movie, his first true love at age 50.
That's
right.
right.
They remained great friends for years afterward. And Dominique happened to be staying with Leonard when she was visiting in Los Angeles when we were shooting the interview. And when she came to where we were setting up, she said, Leonard only told me one thing. He said, I can talk about anything. He's not afraid of anything that I might say. He said, just don't make it literal. Don't tell him like it was your kitchen chair that anyone tied me to, which we thought, yeah, that wouldn't be the issue anyway.
You know, it's also interesting because when we first started talking to Alan Light about optioning his book, one of the early things he said is, you know, you're not the first documentarians that have come to me. Yeah, and we said, well, what has sort of deterred some of our predecessors? And one of the number one things was that they knew, after talking to Alan, that Leonard would not agree to an interview. And we said, well, that's an interesting obstacle, but, you know, maybe it'll inform our approach in a different and more, I don't know, successful way. And it kind of forced us to approach the film from the beginning, not as, you know, had we gotten an interview with him in his 80s, it might have been approached as this older man looking back on his life. But not having access to that interview from the beginning and thinking about how we would do it anyway, allowed us to follow Leonard's life from the beginning to the end. And we think it allows an audience to be immersed in his own spiritual journey that way, because you're sort of walking alongside him from his youth to the older Leonard.
In present tense, you know,
right.
So he's not reflecting so much as he is living the story.
And that kind of goes into my question of, I know you guys were working on the film for several years and you had access to this huge archive. Like, given the huge amount of material you must have been working with, like, how did that inform the tone and style of the film?
The Cohen archives came to us along the way, and in dribs and drabs, as we built up a trust with Robert Corey, who was Leonard's manager, who put him back on the road and became a trustee of the estate as well. So we weren't inundated with it, and some of it we had heard about, such as the journals. There were rumors that they still existed, that they hadn't been thrown away somewhere. So it took quite a while to earn that trust. And of course, those are beautiful to look at. You see process of songwriting, along with Ratzo's tapes, which Dayna particularly was badgering Ratzo for several years after the interview. When we shot at Ratzo was the first interview. At the end of that interview, he said he thought he had tapes in his closet. We didn't realize that he had tapes going back to the very first phone call he made to Leonard in 1973 or whatever it was.
I mean, you know, the thing that's interesting is, again, one of the things that has really, I don't know, inspired, I can say my approach, I can't speak for Dan, is having watched this older documentary by Lars von Trier called The Five Obstructions.
You can speak for me.
Okay. And
you know my feelings.
I've watched that film a zillion times. I think it's one of the most inspiring interesting takes on creative process, especially in filmmaking. And he talks about, he keeps challenging another filmmaker to remake a film with obstacles to the process. So one of the obstacles was you're not going to get to interview Leonard. Another obstacle was it's going to be really hard to clear the rights to the publishing rights to that song. And because we were asking Sony Publishing to do something so unusual, normally, you know, as a filmmaker, you finish your film and then you know what music you're going to put in it, and you go and you ask for usage rights. Well, in this case, we were asking Sony Publishing to do something pretty foreign, which was we need to clear the music rights before we start production, and we need to more or less get you know, rights to use it however many times we want without defining the usage. So that took us about 18 months. The cool thing about that 18 months, even though it was frustrating, was it allowed us to get to know some of the participants before we interviewed them. I mean, we just used that 18-month period to, every time we went to New York, let's take Ratso Sloman to dinner. So by the time we sat and interviewed him, he felt comfortable enough with us so that at the end of that interview, he could turn and say, "Ooh, you know, I think I might actually have these audio tapes." I'm not sure that would have happened had we interviewed him like right after we decided to do the piece. And the same thing happened with Robert Corey, the head of Leonard's longtime manager and then the head of the Cohen Trust. You know, because we kept going back to him as we were trying to clear the rights to the song and taking him to lunch in LA and showing him that we were really sincere about this, and then starting to show him material, he gradually started being comfortable with who we were, our approach, and making it clear that A, those journals, those precious mythical journals existed, and B, that maybe he'd let us see them.
And do you think that is that probably the biggest difference between making a film about a musician that deals with, you know, rights and things like that versus your other films that I know were about artists, but to my knowledge, not about musicians?
True, yes, because Ballet Russe, we weren't really in the same orbit of having to clear that much music from one single artist. And Kids of Survival, obviously they were making work while we were filming. So if that's the other thing that someone had said, you know, if you'd known ahead of time. Actually, Morgan Neville, who is a friend, and then we asked him as a friend, would he come on as an exec producer to be a guiding light, given how many music-based movies he's made. Although he'll tell you quickly, he does not want to be known as a music movie maker. Clearly, he's made a lot of others. But Morgan sort of shook his head and said, you know, you guys, you don't know what you're getting into when it comes to the world of music rights and music clearances. It's not an easy part of the process. And a bit of naivete really went a long way for this movie for us.
Yeah, honestly, had we known, it would have been too daunting. I'm so glad that we went into this as completely naive first timers in the music doc realm.
Sometimes it's a blessing to not know what you know now, right?
Absolutely.
I guess along that line, what surprised you most in making the film?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think a lot of it was finding things out about Leonard. God, there's so many different things that were surprising.
Well, as you compose your thought, the overarching one for me is that the film began to, as we talk about, assert itself back to us as we were editing it, that it really was as much, if not more, about Leonard's seeking than just artistic process and a crazy story of a song. And the balance of the movie began to ask for things to shift around a bit, and the weights and balances of what scenes stay in and how big they are began to shift. And that the wonderful experimental filmmaker and edit Dr. Nathaniel Dorsky had said years ago when he would work with us a little bit on Ballet Russe, a film will declare itself. And I that's something that really stuck with me. I think it's a beautiful notion that if you have the time to listen to the movie and you're not under incredible deadline pressures, the movie will tend to move itself in a direction where it really wants to be.
I mean, the other thing is that we do, when we get into the editing room, especially, you know, that first early pass, we tend to, as Dan said, let the film declare itself, or let the film start. It's not that we let it shape itself. You can't do that, right? The editing room is a very interactive place. But so our original proposal, we thought that the third strand, which was going to be the other singer-songwriters who covered the song, we thought that was going to be a much bigger part. So when we had first articulated the treatment, it was, you know, this whole other strand. We're going to get these singer-songwriters who have never covered the song. We're going to follow them in a verite way. And that's going to be, you know, we'll watch how someone, you know, or a handful of artists unpack the song for the first time. And that felt like a really great thing to do. But as we started filming and going through Leonard's life, and then really getting into the editing room, it became more apparent that the film didn't want to have this whole verite strand. And what really solidified that was we'd hired Hal Wilner, the late, amazing, great Hal Wilner, to be our music producer. And that was his main job. You know, he was going to go out and he was going to find artists who'd never covered it and convince them to be part of our film. So we cut the first act really roughly. We went to see him in New York, and Hal sat there and he looked at it, and he basically put himself out of a job. I mean, other than he was still immensely important, but he turned to us at the end and he said, "You guys don't need that strand. It's so special, like, to be on Leonard's spiritual journey with him and to be there with that song and its weird journey. It's great that you've got singer-songwriters commenting about the song, but you really don't need that verite strand." So that was a big shock.
Mm-hmm.
And is that something that you're like, I wish that was in there on some level? Like, are there scenes or pieces that ended up not being in the film that you want to like live on, or, you know?
I put it this way. It's not that I would want it to be in there, but I would have loved to have been filming it because it would have been fun just to be immersed in that. And that's one of the joys of doing verite work, and we've done a lot of it before, and we'll do more again. But that's what I would miss. The film would not incorporate it. It's clear it would not accept that. But man, you know, there were some ideas that were floating around about people. Like, if I could just sit in a recording studio and be a participant observer as they shape it, yeah, that would have been fine. But that's another movie.
Yeah, I mean, and again, you know, Brandy Carlisle was working on getting Chris Christopherson, who has this incredible connection with Leonard, but has never covered that song. And she was going to produce, you know, a session with Chris. You know, there were things like that that would have been really fun, and I think it would have been additive, but not additive to the film as it wanted to be.
Right. The film sort of pointedly doesn't attempt to explain the song. Can you talk about that choice?
You know, I think Leonard never attempted to explain the song. And as he said, as Dan said earlier, the last thing he said to Dominique Isserman,
right,
before she came to her interview, was, "Come on, Dominique, do not let them make it literal." And it wasn't. And I think, you know, in the film itself, there's this amazing moment when he's been doing the quote unquote King David version, which is the first version of Hallelujah that appeared on various positions. And it was what he sung for the first 4 years. And then all of a sudden, you know, Ratso goes to see him and he's like, "Oh, wow, we're not in the Old Testament anymore." So I think the fact that it was a shape-shifting song for Leonard, and that his relationship to the word hallelujah and the words in the song and the verses in the song shifted over time. I think that that alone was reason not to try to define what the song means.
I think you also kind of answer it why in the film a little bit. There's a character who talks about why he has never asked Leonard to explain it, and I thought that was very well put. But I was curious about your decision as well.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, that was John Lissauer, the man who co-wrote and produced with Leonard, including the initially ill-fated Various Positions album. So when the guy who's co-writing the music, at least, and arranging and sitting there says he didn't want to know, he felt the art should explain itself, that set the standard, I think.
I mean, obviously, if there was some interview that we found where Leonard actually definitively explained the song, we would have found a way to put it in. But in looking at and listening to, hundreds of interviews with Leonard from the late 60s, really, all the way, or mid 60s, all the way through the end of his life, it became clear that he never defined it. And so as filmmakers, why should we?
Also, there with all those verses, looking at those notebooks, perhaps it had a shifting meaning.
Clearly, I mean, he went through a period where he felt he was, as he says in the movie, choking on some of the words. And then out go 3 of the 4 original recorded verses. It's only a 4-verse song on that first record. So 3 of the 4 get tossed. And then he adds in 4 more new ones. Mm-hmm. And now it's a 5-verse song. So for him, it's interesting when we were looking at footage of the world tours toward the end of his life, when he was back on the road, he would sing Hallelujah different ways on different nights, mixing and matching verses himself. There's something he says in the movie, which is, if you can stand in the center of your song and stand for its emotional complexities, then you're giving something to an audience. And he was talking about live performance in particular. And so we could see why maybe as he shifted it from night to night, whatever he was feeling that night, and maybe that is a reflection of the song itself, where, as Brandy Carlisle says, in the movie, people are singing it for their happy times, like for weddings, and their dark times, like funerals. The song itself is so contradictory and complex and interesting that way that I could see why Cohen himself swam in those waters.
And every musician who covers it brings a different tone and feeling, which leads me to my next question, which is your favorite version?
Oh gosh, I mean, honestly, to some extent, it depends on the day, but truly, consistently, my favorite version is the older Leonard singing it in those concerts. He's at this point in his life where it's the most sincere, satisfying, even though he's got a gravelly voice, rendition of that song.
You could see him lose himself in the song too, in that footage around the world. And to see a performer not phone it in, but really lose himself. There's a moment after the concert near Tel Aviv in Ramat Gan Stadium where he is deep into the song, and he ends the song with the last evocation of the word hallelujah. And then he looks up and realizes he's in front of 65,000 people in this outdoor stadium at night. And there's this look that comes over his face, this combination of surprise that suddenly yields to unbelievable joy. Not a look you see on Leonard Cohen's face as a performer when he's 40 or when he's 50. It's so to see those performances, and we were present for the ones in Oakland, California, because we went back another time when he came back through on the second leg of the tour. That would be my favorite. And then musically, I love Jeff Buckley's voice, and I love his guitar introduction. It's such a beautiful cover. But then again, I love the minimalism of John Cale's version. I think that's part of what you were talking about, that everybody brings their own tone and interpretation to it. And there's such a reflection of the artist covering it as well, that it makes it a joy to see. We always get these emails from people, hey, have you seen so-and-so's done it? It's always interesting. And
one of the things that's been fun watching social media reactions to the film is to see people arguing with each other. So someone posts something or someone tweets something about the film, and then what ensues are, many people chiming in with, well, Leonard's version is, definitely not the best. It's all about Jeff Buckley. And someone else will write in and say, no, it's all about Leonard. And like, have you heard Katie Lang? So it's really, that's been one of the fun things about the participatory nature of the response to this film.
And you just see how the film continues to live on, with each new artist that covers it. So pretty special.
Yeah. It's been a blessing, believe me.
Well, is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about? That would be my final question.
I think I've always said every film finds its way out. Every documentary gets into the world in its own way through one festival or another, or no festivals, and suddenly it's on a streamer. But one thing that Dayna and I had wanted from the start of the process was to make sure that somehow and on a substantial basis, this movie got into theaters because it's representing an emotional experience as much as anything. Musically, of course, it's beautifully mixed by the folks at Skywalker, and you want to hear Leonard's music, but there's something about sitting in a darkened space and surrendering yourself to that screen with people around you and the anonymity of that you can laugh, but you can cry and it's okay. That was a goal from the beginning, and it really informed how we constructed the movie for that environment primarily, and also for how because we own the movie ourselves as real independent filmmakers, staked our own life savings into it. I don't advise that for everybody, but that we made sure that we were in the hands of a good distributor that would listen to it. And so both Dogwoof as sales agent, when we made that really clear to them, and then Sony Pictures Classics, and then for the Jokers and Pro Kino, all respected that and all have made that possible, which is, to me, the realization of the dream.
Right. I mean, when we first started in the editing room, especially, we would say, you know, our dream is to have a theatrical, and people would look at us, and then especially as COVID started unfolding, and at certain points we would look at each other and say, you know, are we just tilting at windmills here? Should we just give up our dreams about a theatrical? But we kept persisting in that concept because we really believe deeply that it's not just a concert movie or a music movie, it's a spiritual journey, but there's something about, as Dan said, seeing it on a big screen and listening to it in that unbelievable surround sound way that you only get in a movie theater, and again, being with an audience. So we kept persisting, and it's really exciting that it's out there. We've been able to travel around the world with the film and see audiences all over the world watching this film with, you know, in darkened theaters.
To paraphrase a line we all know so well, I love the smell of popcorn in the evening.
Well, I guess I have one other question. Has the reaction been different depending on where in the world it's showing?
You know, I think each country in the world feels like they own. First of all, I knew that he was an international star, but to actually be in Amsterdam or be in Jerusalem, you know, to be in Copenhagen and see the extent of his fandom. And I feel like each city or each country has a different sense of ownership of Leonard Cohen, and they get excited about different things. But it's moved them. Like, for instance, we just were in Auckland, New Zealand, and the very first shot of the film is Leonard's final concert, which happened to take place in Auckland. And so the audience I mean, they were excited about the whole thing, but of course that was like, you know, when we were in Jerusalem and the last concert scene shows up and Leonard's doing that amazing prayer for reconciliation between Arabs and Jews, you know, the audience just broke down. And then of course, when we were in Tribeca at the Beacon and the Beacon shots come up, you know, as because it was such a pivotal place, the whole audience just, you know.
What I'm finding and is really affirming is that you don't need to be a Leonard Cohen fan to see the movie. And people who have either been dragged to the movie by someone who really likes Leonard Cohen or went because they've heard about the movie have come out and saying that, yes, Leonard Cohen, but there's something else that is going on that is reaching inside about facing adversity, which Leonard did in many times, artistic adversity when that album was rejected, personal adversity when all his money was ripped off, and bouncing back from that and continuing on and looking into oneself at the same time as trying to drive forward in a life where you acquire dents on the frame a little bit. And we're really seeing dents, D-E-N-T-S.
Yeah.
And we're really seeing that, especially with you know, audiences that might be a little bit older, you know, who run into some adversity along the way and understand how hard life can be. It's affecting them in profound ways. And that, to me, is above all the most rewarding thing to see that we've somehow managed to channel that aspect of Leonard, embracing the joyous and the broken, the holy and the carnal, that it's channeled out enough to touch audiences.
I love that. Well, on that note, I want to thank you so much for talking with me, and the film is wonderful, and huge congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
We're
for
thrilled
having
this.
us. We're thrilled to be chosen by the IDA.
Yes.
Thank you.